All right, well, officially, hello everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation. How should we think today? I'll be passing it over to organizers to introduce our special guest speaker in a minute. But first, just to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Concordia University's Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We'd like to extend our gratitude to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, who are the caretakers for the lands and waters on which we are meeting today, for their teachings about the earth and our relations. If you're new to Fourth Space, online or in person, welcome one and all. What we do here is work with our university community, faculty members, students, and staff to mobilize and exchange knowledge by co-creating daily activities, workshops, podcasts, panel conversations, and sort of moments of engagement with individuals such as today's event. It's our pleasure to have collaborated once again with the Students of Philosophy Association to make this event possible. And I'll just note that we will invite you to join in the conversation with questions, comments, reflections. If you're in the space, please just raise a hand and let us know that you'd like to speak. We will get a microphone to you so that the people on Zoom can hear you. And if you're in Zoom, I'll be allowing you to unmute yourselves and open up your video if you'd like to jump in that way with a raised hand. Thanks very much. And now it's now my pleasure to pass it over to Ash. Hi, Ash.
Hello. Thank you for coming, everybody. I'd like to thank Fourth Space for hosting this event and AFSA for sponsoring the event, as well as the Inclusivity Project. Today, Michael Pellias will be speaking about the ecological crisis, as well as philosophy's relationship to that crisis. And he will introduce himself and get started. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both you, Ashkan, and to Celine for inviting me. I'm here from New York City. I maybe should put the mic on. Is that right? Yeah, I have it in my pocket. I'm sorry. Not accustomed to this. But I have a loud voice, so it carries. Let's see. I press the top. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, I think this is it. Okay, good, thank you. Yeah, so again, I want to thank the Philosophy Association. I met some of these students last year. We did a little talk on Plato's Parmenides, two classes with Professor Paul Catanu, who is someone I worked with many years ago. I helped with his master's thesis on Nietzsche. So we go way back 20-something years, 25 years here in Montreal. I live in Montreal during the summer. I like it here very much. It's a nice escape. Most people take country homes, but I took another city. We call it the Big Village in New York City. So I come up for the summer to use the libraries and enjoy the city very much. And I've had many friends here over the years, including many graduates of Concordia's philosophy program, as well as attending, when Kai Nielsen was still alive, the Friday roundtables, which was really delightful for me to do, kind of extemporaneously. So I have a very special relationship to Montreal, a special relationship to philosophy here in Montreal. And I want to say that this is quite an honor to see this, that you have, even though philosophy is a very hard sell, it's really nice to see the audience here today. And it's very, very imperative for, I think, us to have a philosophical background at this point, and it should be integral to the curriculum. A few words about myself. I started basically in an interdisciplinary program many years ago in the 70s in Baltimore, Maryland at Johns Hopkins. I was a kind of goof-off student before then, but I got very serious when I ended up in this Humanities Center program, where I was able to do a kind of cross-disciplinary program with structural anthropology, philosophy, certainly political economy. I had the good fortune of being around when David Harvey, who you probably know, whose major recent book has been on reading capital and, of course, the history of neoliberalism, when he first started the Urban Center at Johns Hopkins University. Also anthropology with Sidney Mintz, who had a great book on sugar sweetness as power, on the sugar trade in the Caribbean. And in philosophy, I was very lucky. I was on my way to law school, but I got waylaid by philosophy. I took a course in existentialism, which changed my thinking about everything. A very good introduction, but the professor, Ralph Harper, at that time was absolutely phenomenal. He wrote the first book on existentialism in the English language in 1948 when he was at Harvard, a very poetic account of what existentialism was. So I started to read actively Sartre. I wrote my thesis on Camus and the philosophy of the absurd, which is coming back constantly today. And I also, many explorations with Sartre. I moved forward to the Frankfurt School, the Italian Marxists, Gramsci, all the way through the contemporary people such as Antonio Negre and the Autonomia groups, as well as French thinking has been very, very influential on me, especially the French readings of Heidegger's texts, as well as Nietzsche's texts. Even though I don't only restrict myself to that, I try to, this is how I'm sort of formed and, have been teaching for many years. As a sidelight, I'm not really someone that's very high on the academic teaching of philosophy. I have I guess a kind of edge in some ways, or a outside view of the academy in some ways, although I've been in it 35 years. I like to say I'm in it, but I'm not of it. And I think this is an important thing that people should remember in this time of massive assault on the curriculum, this whole thing. And one reason that I think we're really more and more in a state of emergency, if you follow the states, this whole thing on the woke culture and the critical race theory, as many things being eliminated from the curriculum. And I'll say it here, I'm not sure this is going to happen, but it looks like in the states that DeSantis is the front runner for the next presidency of the United States. Biden is having a hard time getting him up to walk, much less to lead. And I'm not so sure our vice president in the Democratic Party is so good either, even though she was educated here in high school. So, and we'll give her that certainly. And I do a lot of things on the side, and I want to mention this too because I'm going to maybe speak a little bit about the latest projects. With Stanley Aronowitz, a very good friend of mine who passed away about a year and a half ago, a leading social, political philosopher. He was in the Department of Sociology and wrote books from The Knowledge Factory backwards to False Promises. Probably the most, in my view, with Mike Davis, one of the two most important labor intellectuals in the United States who had a philosophical background. We started a journal called Situations, Project of the Radical Imagination. And the radical imagination was taken from many levels. Situations was obviously taken from Sartre's notion of everybody has freedom in a determinate situation. Not that we're just free or free will, but we have freedom of choice, freedom to act in a determinate situation, something that's always, struck me as something courageous, as well as something that we can certainly, work with into the future, something that's lasting in Sartre, in Being and Nothingness, as well as in the later work, The Critique of Dialectical Reason. So we chose that title as also a play on Guy Debord's The Situationist manifestos and the group called The Situationists. Maybe some of you know the Society of the Spectacle, which I think time has come to reread. And I want to emphasize that verb to reread, that's where we really seem to be right now. We have to read, but we really have to reread a lot of these classic works that I think threw things into question in a radical and different way, given the circumstances we're in. So we also use radical imagination from Cornelius Castoriadis. He put out what the radical imagination is through the imaginary institution of society. So the radical imagination is always trying to reroute the imagination in a very different way. Just not what we see in images. It tries to critique productive imagination, transcendental imagination, all of these kind of categories. So this journal has been going on now for 17 years. We have a new issue coming out very soon. And so I've been very involved in that as the editor-in-chief, and made a lot of very good friendships along the way because of that. And I'm also, we formed the Institute for the Radical Imagination, and we give courses online as part of an alternative learning project, a learning center. I'm very fond, I put his name up here, Bernard Stiegler, who unfortunately passed away about 1.5 to 2 years ago in the beginning of the pandemic. I think it's a great loss, but he was involved in many projects through the Ars Industrialis. So our little thing in New York is called the Institute for the Radical Imagination, and we offer alternative courses. So I just finished something, and one of the reasons for the title leading up to today is what is called Thinking by Martin Heidegger, lectures that he gave 1951 to 52, the winter session and the spring session, or the fall and winter sessions in Freiburg in 1951-52. This was the first series of lectures that Heidegger gave after the denazification. This term is not just Sergei Lavrov's or Vladimir Putin's term to denazify. So anyway, after the war, Heidegger gave these lectures about thinking and the confrontation, if you will, with the cybernetics and the cyberspace, which we're participating in today, obviously, in fourth space here. But anyway, I'm going to, try to present this somewhat about what is called thinking of Heidegger, that opened up a new possibility or new paths for thinking as we move forward, taking on the history of philosophy and the end of philosophy. Really is the way he said it, that philosophy had reached its limit. And in Heidegger's case, the Geschichte that we have, the history of philosophy, we're all part of ascending. We have been sent this metaphysical epoch. And I don't want to talk way over anybody here today. I mean, this is not my intention, but Heidegger had a thing about the history of being, right? And that being itself manifests itself from Plato to Nietzsche in such a way that we have gotten into this mess, right, at this point. Not that it was the philosopher's fault, but the way being as absolute knowledge in Hegel, and being as will to power played out in our everyday lives and in the decisions we made. And this was, for Heidegger, somewhat beyond our control, because the attack here, again, is on philosophical anthropology. That man, and I'm going to talk about this today because of the ecological horizon, the Anthropocene, that you've probably heard about, and how does one get beyond the Anthropocene, in a sense, with Heidegger, with Stiegler, and where I'm coming from too. So anyway, to go back to this, so I did this class on the end of philosophy and its limits, in which one begins to say, one begins to think the closure of Western metaphysics, if you will, does not mean we're just leaving the baby with the bathwater. It means that we really have to work through it in a different way, to go back and reread, rethink, etc., very much like the Derridian enterprise of deconstruction. I don't know how much of this you get in your classes here, but in a sense, this to me, the moment of Heidegger post-World War II, of a brand of French Marxism, as well as where Stiegler ends up, is probably, to me at least, the most potent thinking out there. With all due respect to analytical philosophy, it does not have historicity alongside of it. I consider myself a combination of both historical materialism, we're always looking, not as a historicist, a narrow-minded approach to this, but always we're looking at the historical horizon in which thought emerges. For Heidegger, again, it's epochal. We're thinking through epochs in terms of sending. So the first sending is the idea. We still talk about the struggle of ideas, the conflict of faculties, these kind of things from Plato, right? We go back to the theory of forms, right? How did that happen? How did the eidos relate. How does then Husserl, who you probably know somewhat, the phenomenologist, go back and start doing things with the eidetic reduction? How do we self-reflexively look at forms and how forms emerge, right? So in some ways, Heidegger is tracing this movement of Plato's ideas and ideation and the creation of forms all the way up to the Husserlian project of phenomenology that wants to get back to the things themselves, right, in some way. So Husserl remains within this epochal closure, if you will, of Western metaphysics. This was, of course, his teacher. And for those of you who know something about Heidegger, very, very close to Husserl and the phenomenological methods of reduction. Then, of course, of Hegel, the absolute knowing, the absolute spirit. How does that come full circle into our absolute knowing? Again, part of an epoch that begins with Descartes in terms of subjectivity and self-consciousness, right? That the cogito becomes the institution of the West. And if we think about this even more, how much we're dominated by the cogito and still by a Cartesian rationality. Very much saying, in terms of, we're always talking about homeopathic medicine, but allopathic still rules. We talk about calculated rationality, still rules, right? In a sense, we don't have alternative economic systems. So in some ways, Heidegger, again, is trying to take this, to task, in a sense. Not a Marxist, Heidegger, obviously, but he certainly is anti-capitalist, right? There's no question about that, and I'll talk more about that when I put up some of the scenes. So anyway, the lecture of thinking, Heidegger basically makes some very provocative remarks. First of all, thinking is thought-provoking, right? You cannot have thinking without a provocation, without a calling out, or calling for something. So you're really asking the calling itself, what is being called out in the questioning, in the space, in the place, if you will. And that's another thing. I'll put this up here because this is, I think, very important for us to think towards the future. The topos, right? The place instead of space, right? Topos, to do a topological reading of where we are, place instead of space, just temporal spatial relations or spatial temporal relations. We should think about ourselves in terms of place. Where are we? In terms of topos and the topological way of looking at things. So anyway, so to think means to be provoked, to be called out. You're thinking about something, and really the task here is the ability to frame the question correctly. And you probably know this, again, is a very good language. I'll erase this part. Heidegger begins, and again, I'm trying to get us situated how we think about the environment. The Gestell, right? The framing or the framework. And this comes out of his work in early 50s as well on the question concerning technology. How are we framed up? How do we become part of this age of a world picture? How do we get into picture thinking? How do we become dominated by the visual and by images instead? And of course, the sense organ that's most important to Heidegger is hearing. Hence the calling, right? The calling must be heard, and in a sense. So this is a very different moment than phenomenology in the Husserlian sense, because phenomenology is basically an attempt to get back to the things themselves through the eye, the art of seeing differently. I think we should have both. I don't think it's one or the other. It's both and. The problem is we're dominated by this space, this cyberspace, if you will, or framed up through the visual, etc. All you have to do is come to New York City, walk down 42nd Street and see what's happening. Everything's going on there. We call it the new pornography, Disney pornography. And now we're going to get casinos on 42nd Street. New York has now become the home to a struggle of who's going to run the casinos in the city. So again, this kind of moment of a Gestell, a new framing up of everything, that we do. So from this Gestell, what Heidegger is trying to do is say that there's something called Gefahren, right? The Gefahr, the danger. How do we think? How do we cross into a danger zone where we can basically break open these frameworks and not smash the frameworks like a Luddite would do. And I can go back to Earth First, if you know the moment there and the eco-terrorist moment. But really, in a way, the danger of really thinking through where technology, the sending of technology has taken us, how techne has been reduced to a framework. Techne no longer means that we're thinking, right? And thinking also has a lot to do with the hand, right? In German, the Begriffen, the grasping of something, another very important aspect of this. So it becomes very material and very powerful in a way to how do we open up this Stellung, right? This constellation that frames us up, and how do we begin to, produce new concepts, new ways of thinking, and in Heidegger's case, really new pathworks, right? And the connection here to me is, of course, to Stiegler, who writes, many, many books. I don't know if you know Stiegler, but to me, this is someone that there should be seminars on. He's been here, by the way, to Montreal, I think twice. Daniel Ross was here, his translator. The movie Der Ister, which is about Holderlin, was presented here at Concordia, I think at about 2005, 2006, at one of the buildings, I think across the street. I don't know the names of the buildings, but there's a cinema. I think there's one back here now. But anyway, all to say, the film Der Ister, which is about Holderlin's poem about the river, the Ister, in Germany. And Stiegler becomes part of that commentary on what has happened in technology. How, some ways the agricultural combines, rapacious capitalism, carboniferous capitalism. And I use those terms very advisedly. I am an extremist in a good sense, I think. I try to think to the extreme, but I use those terms to say to everybody, look, we're living in a rapacious capitalism. In case nobody's realized that this Ukrainian war is really about the war industry. It has nothing to do with anything else, really in a way. I mean, there's $100 billion of US money has gone to Ukraine right now. And this is a country that does not have healthcare for all. We do not have universal healthcare. We have a population that is so uneducated, so dense in a way, and still, some of the best and the brightest, but at the same time, we're living in a country where, think of this in Canada, you have over 100 million people who are basically underinsured or uninsured for healthcare, a basic right that is a total privilege in the United States. I'm very lucky because I'm on the government policies, but if I had been out, just to give you an idea, a single person, that's over 65 would pay about $12,000 to $15,000 a year just for premiums to have health care insurance. I see your eyes went up. Yeah, and that's for the basics, for the good basics, right? It goes as high as 30,000, and that may only cover 80% of the surgery, so you're 20% out of pocket. So you're very lucky. I mean, I don't think it's luck. I think it's a social wage and a social policy here that the United States has never had, in a way. So again, I'm not here to just bash the United States. I don't want to do that completely, but I could spend another 5 hours going through every parameter there. So anyway, but all to say, I don't know. Are anybody familiar with the 18th Brumaire of Karl Marx? Marx says, he begins with, Hegel said, history proceeds, first time the event appears as tragic, the second time as farce. We're well beyond the farcical now in the United States. We're at pastiche, and we don't really have a category of how bad it is. We have caricatures and Congress, et cetera, and it's really pretty amazing that this behemoth, right, this Leviathan, this country that has, and remember, the United States spends 5 to 6 times the amount of money on military, right, munitions, weapons of mass destruction than Russia, right, in a sense. Russia now has geared up in terms of its production, enough ammunition for the next 3 years, and the United States has not even started to. This is one of the reasons why German tanks, Leopard tanks, are going into the Ukraine. So anyway, this is another story. We'll talk about this because I have seven challenges I'd like to present for discussion and part of this little talk. So anyway, going back to this Gestalt, we're framed up. So Heidegger's always looking for a path, and he makes very provocative comments such as science does not think. And this has really gotten people upset, right? Especially the scientific community. Even though he was very good friends and had long conversations, I don't know if they were very good friends, but they knew each other, Werner Heisenberg, right, as well, and he certainly refers to Einstein and Bergson and the theories of time in the back of Being and Time. So this is section 82 of his magnum opus, if you want to call it that still. Yeah, so anyway, this path taken would be outside of scientific rationality, outside of this moment. And this is another thing too. We don't really we talk about neoliberalism. I think that's, excuse me, a very limited term because I think we're living in basically domination by technoscience. That's the framing, as well as a technocratic governance in many ways, if we really look at what's going on globally, and we can certainly discuss that as well. So Heidegger, again, looking at how techne has become just technique, just framing us up, et cetera, to think outside of that towards something, okay? So the whole notion, and I have a term, I'm starting to work on this, ethology, which comes from the Greek word ethos, where the word environment. This is in Aristotle in the second, lecture of the Nicomachean Ethics. He begins here. Ethos is very, very important. So the ethos, in a sense, I think that we need to really think, quote, the environment, think the ethos first and foremost. We really need this moment. And we need so in maybe a multiple phase moment. And again, we can speak to this more later, but let me just offer a couple of parameters. A stoic apatheia, that we withdraw in a way. Apatheia means you're moving away from the pathos because you're distantiating yourself and distancing yourself from the pathos because you know that doctrine already. You've been there. You've done it already. So the stoic active acceptance of the what is, but then to go beyond actively, right? Alongside, a thinking, if you will, and Heidegger speaks of this all the time, the Nietzschean Übermensch, right? And the Übermensch is not, quote, Superman, or the great virile monsters that we see on TV, the alpha males, and all of this, or is it this notion of the German soldier that can go through every trial and tribulation? Übermensch means the crossing over. The Über in German is the crossing over or the across. So we have to think outside of what we ultimately will call, and I'll put this up too, because I want to mention Walter Benjamin, because I think this is where we are, even though he wrote this many, crossing over the Anthropocene, right? How do we cross over Anthropos or the Anthropocene? And just another reference, again, obviously, I have an affinity and sometimes a revulsion with Heidegger. So, but anyway, Heidegger, again, points out this notion of the Anthropos by a reading of Antigone in Introduction to Metaphysics, a very beautiful, of the Ode to Man, the Ode to Anthropos in the Greek. The Greek for man is Anthropos. In Greek we say, I'm Greek in background, not ancient Greek, but anyway. In Greek, we say anthropoi, someone's an anthropos if they're really a mensch, right? They really do well, and they do well by you. But anyway, this is what Heidegger, again, is trying to confront by talking about the strangeness, et cetera, of man, right? And this is the place, by the way, in the Antigone where Hölderlin is translated, where he goes mad. So it's kind of interesting. You have madness alongside this translation of the ancient Greek into German and this uncanny moment, right? This very uncanny moment that's happening, right? In German poetry and German practice. And this, of course, for philosophy students, is the period of German Romanticism. It's the period of Hegelianism as well. You know, this moment of Hölderlin, you know, he, Hegel, and Schelling were best friends. They planted the tree of liberty, you know, for Germany to catch up with the French political, you know, advances of the revolution. So anyway, to go back to this again, this anthropos is going to be destroyed. I just want to mention two things here, and then I'll go a little maybe deeper into some parameters. I have, if anybody's interested, I can send you this. I wrote with a bunch of other people, but I framed it. I'll give myself some credit here, and you know, wrote a good part of it called "Revolution in the Virocene." I put it here too. The Situations Collective. We actually wrote it 2020 before the election, and we ended with the Mask of the Red Death before the election when Trump was defeated by Biden. Et cetera. But anyway, I want to read you because we began with something that I think is, again, a very important concept, state of exception. Certainly you've heard of this, Carl Schmitt. Most governments, I think your brilliant Liberal Party Premier Trudeau uses state of exception in this recent constitutional thing you have here. Certainly has been used in Germany in the 1930s, and by the United States especially, we've been in a state of exception since the bombing of the Twin Towers, since 2001. So I just want to read you what Benjamin said, and this is in 1940, before his suicide when he was trying. Do you know Walter Benjamin? Most of you? Good, okay. So, you know, this is thesis 8 of the philosophy of history. The tradition of the oppressed teaches us that the state of emergency in which we live in is not the exception, but the rule. This is very important, this first sentence. It is not the exception, but it is the rule. We must attain to a conception of history that is keeping with this insight. Then we shall clearly realize that it is our task to bring around a real state of emergency. So I use this task of thinking, right, again, of Heidegger, and the tasks before us at the end of philosophy. It is our task to bring about this state of emergency. Yeah, this is part of what, at least I'm involved in with the Situations Collective, as you know, as with the Institute for Radical Imagination, and hopefully in classrooms with students. You know, these days, students, you know, as professor, and I've been doing it again for a long time, you know, you're lucky if you hit 20% in the kind of attention deficit economy that's happening. You know, that's another thing that we need to reorient is the attention economy. Let me read some more Benjamin. Then we shall clearly realize that it is our task to bring about a real state of emergency, and this will improve our struggle against fascism and the struggle against fascism. Until you do that, you know, etc. One reason why fascism has a chance is that in the name of progress, and I think this is very true today, you know, what we're witnessing, its opponents treat it as a historical norm. So we began this thing, Revolution in the Virocene, as pandemic paper number 1 about this, right? You know, using the state of emergency for the beginning. So, you know, I'm going to try to go for another maybe 20, 25 minutes, you know, because I want to leave time for real discussion, you know. So, I mean, you know, I have a bad reputation. I'm called the Fidel Castro of the lecture circuit, that I go on and on and on 4 or 5 hours and then have stories. But anyway, I don't mind that. I'm kind of honored by being called that. So anyway, the beginning of this piece is how we have, and I think this is important for imperatives too, we foreclose the political. And I know you're interested in ecology and the ecological moment here, and what I would call, you know, green rage, By the way, very, very good book on green rage. So I think this is important. Sorry to move around. Anyway, it's okay. All right. So foreclosing the political, we have had no really politics in the last period. I mean, I grew up again, 60s, early 70s. I'm coming of age. We've witnessed a long, long period of what Marcuse called counter-revolution and revolt. Right? We have really lived through a period of 50 years. This is why I do not like neoliberalism as a term. I like hyper-industrialization, and I like financialization, and then we're in late liberalism as terms. These are concepts that I'm trying to work out right now. Late liberalism being that this was not a neoliberalism, it's a kind of taking of liberal ideas and adapting them to the new forms of financialization and new forms. If you don't know this, I mean, this is a good historical marker in terms of dating. 1973 was a crucial year. We began to witness the greatest transference of wealth from one part of the world to the other, the OPEC rise and the price of oil. We woke up. Yeah, I can remember gasoline was like 45 cents a gallon. Yeah, that's totally absurd today, of course. That's a gallon, so I guess for you guys, a liter, it would be what about, what is a liter is yeah, right, okay. So, it's unbelievable where we've gone, and the price of gasoline, tenfold in terms of an energy source, the fossil fuel carboniferous capitalism that we live in. So anyway, OPEC, the transference of wealth. At the same time, this is the beginning of what's called the derivative markets, right? This is when the Chicago Options Exchange begins trading on futures, whether a stock price will rise or not. From there, we had the morphs of the Blythe Masters. She did the credit default swaps, all of this stuff. Most of you probably saw the movie The Big Short, which is a very, very fine film, I think, that kind of gives you a popular culture explanation. And it's popular culture when, what's her name, Selena Gomez, is giving you how it works at a casino table, a blackjack table in Las Vegas. So anyway, all to say, this to me was a grand shift, right, in the world and what we're thinking about, and part of that counter-revolutionary moment. And you can trace that aspect of the financialization of everyday life, really what happened here. It's all about, worker salaries, by the way, I think this is probably true in Canada as well, if you do the statistics. Worker salaries have stayed on a flat line since 1973 in real dollars. Nominal dollars, yes, of course. Professor used to make 18 to 20,000, now can make over 100 a year. But that 100 does not spend like the 20 did back in the day. So really, in a way, there's that deficit. And of course, what has been created since there is the debtor economy, the credit card, and now the student debt. Another great fact about the United States, the student debt is $1.8 trillion. $1.8 trillion. The average US student, college student, will leave college with a debt of $24,000 or 30-something thousand, low 30,000, Canadian debt. And that's just for an undergraduate degree, which is not worth anything. I mean, really, these days, you can go, maybe be one of the baggers, and work for tips after you self-serve at the Whole Foods or something like that. So we've been living in this kind of thing, and with all due respect to David Harvey, who I have great admiration for, and know, this neoliberalism is much more a monster than we've thought. Really, in a way, I wanted to begin today with Beckett's, I guess Beckett's Endgame. And this, to me, is really where we are. I want to say, from my standpoint, I am very much taken by Romain Rolland's great phrase that was taken up by Gramsci. We have to think through the pessimism of the intellect all the way with an optimism of the will. right? And whether we have that optimism, again, that kind of level of commitment is very important as we move forward. So anyway, back to this paper. So we looked at, how the political itself has been foreclosed. I mean, if I remember correctly, you had Mulrooney here, you had all kinds of, right-wing people associated with the Bushes, associated with, the neocon movements around. Quebec has, I think, suffered tremendously as a social experiment. I think that's worth looking into and criticizing, although, when you talk to people from Quebec, they get very defensive about, any kind of critique. And I want to say, too, that, with hyper-industrialization comes hyper-critique. You just don't criticize and point out little things. There has to be this hyper-critique. And I guess some of you know Merleau-Ponty, right? And he wrote a very good piece in The Adventures of the Dialectic on the hyper-dialectic of Sartre, especially this pushing and pushing and pushing, which in Merleau-Ponty's at least estimation pushed Sartre to the point of a kind of Stalinist moment. In the critique of dialect reason. But anyway, the Tina syndrome that you probably have heard of, there's no alternative, that Maggie Thatcher said, has now become, whatever happens, nothing will ever be the same, right? We have this now going on. So this foreclosure is very important to think through. And we're using this language, or at least I am, in the Lacanian sense, you have a foreclosure of any kind of conceptual difference, a foreclosure of the name of the Father. You have this foreclosure that doesn't allow anybody to move forward. So we're looking at this foreclosure both materially, but also psychically, in a sense. So I want to point this out. So, and then the real exception we talk about, we're living in a period of normalized catastrophe. This is what I really think we're living in is a concept that could be developed and further elaborated, the normalized catastrophe. And the eco crisis, and why the title Ecocide, and by the way, Ecocide was used early in the 40s, but it was Marcuse who really used it actively, speaking of counter-revolution and revolt on Agent Orange and herbicidal activity as early as 1961 in Vietnam. This was really the ecocidal moment, right, in a sense. So we've been living through that chemical weapons. If you do your research, you can see Ukraine has been a laboratory for chemical weapons. Victoria Nuland has authorized this too. I mean, I have friends that, feed, I guess Cy Hirsch's latest thing that the US was, they never admitted it, but everybody knew. Why would Russia blow up their own, Nord Stream platform and pipeline, right? So now Cy Hirsch is out there and he's being scapegoated as the old man. He's gone crazy, et cetera. You guys know about this? Seymour Hersh came out and has documented that the Navy SEALs basically blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Ukraine. Okay, you should check it out. He's very good. He actually was the same person who exposed the My Lai massacre, as well as Abu Ghraib torture. He's one of the best investigative reporters out there. He's 85 and he's still lucid. Pulitzer Prize winner, Polk Award winner, internationally known, and he's got contacts very high up. I mean, people don't realize this, but obviously the CIA has a lot of people that, feed, the right information at the right time, and in some ways, and make people like Cy Hirsch, Daniel Ellsberg, there's a long history of this. So the ecocide, to go back to this in a way, is part of, again, this moment of chemical warfare that's happening, that's going on, today before our eyes, et cetera. But I think maybe what I should do, because I don't want to, I'll play Che Guevara. I'll tell you a funny story about Che and Fidel. So Che and Fidel, after the revolution in Cuba, are sitting around, and Fidel says, we need someone to head up the bank, et cetera. Who here's an economist? And Che raises his hand. So then Fidel says, yeah, okay, you're going to be the chairman of the bank. So later they're discussing this, and Fidel says to Che, I didn't know you were an economist. He said, I thought you said, is anyone here a communist? And so in some ways, this is, I think a good story to, kind of move into, the notion. By the way, the Cuban vaccine, I study this too. I'm in contact, through Zoom. I've never had the pleasure of meeting him, but with the Cuban ambassador to the UN, their vaccines are very good. They have the best efficacy in the world right now. Yeah. And then if you get vaccinated again, Novavax is probably the closest thing to it. Don't get Pfizer. Even if you've had Pfizer, Novavax should be the fifth vaccine or whatever booster you're on, et cetera. So let me go back to this. I want to talk about again a couple of things here. I framed out some challenges, and I want to make sure that I want to put up some terms. General intellect, which is from the Grundrisse of Marx. And this is from the Grundrisse, Marx. And that means basically the collective intelligence. We've forgotten about that. Yeah. We become over-specialized, narrowly framed, etc. So the collective intelligence that Marx speaks of in terms of the general intellect, the question here would be to be, one strategy to be ahead of technological developments. And this is something that, Stiegler and other people have done in terms of their institutes around the world, right? The Ars Industrialis. Be ahead of it as to anticipate and to live and, and basically to give, better techniques for living. And this is what Marx really was about. I mean, Marx is about eros over thanatos. And the problem with the whole thing of ecocide is that the death drive, or what the Greeks call thanatos, right? The death instinct, if you will, is dominating everyday life. And, really in a sense, it's not only ecocide that's going on by the powers that be, it's suicide too, really in a way, I mean, if you look at this thing, and this is why I mentioned Cy Hirsch, really the victim of this blowing up of the Nord Stream is Germany. It's Western Europe. They're really the victims in all of this. If you really begin to think about it, who is going to, suffer the most? The U.S. has enormous amounts of strategic petroleum reserves. Canada does too. The price will be higher here because of your taxes and, towards national health care and probably better social policies. But anyway, not going to get hit like Western Europe, which has dependency on, OPEC and of course on the price of oil, and delivery from Russia at this point. So anyway, the collective intelligence, the general intellect, very much guided by Eros to give us better techniques of living. So this is a very important concept going forward. I would suggest, to go back to the Grundrisse if you haven't, or to take a look at this. This to me is Marx's great notebooks about what it means to have a collective intelligence. And again, I'll send out a kind of a triadic structure. Psychic and mental individuation. This is where we are. In this, we also have then technical individuation, the advance of technology, et cetera, and then finally the collective individuation. And this is Stiegler, in one aspect of his way of dealing with the toxicity of everyday life. Those of you that know Derrida, one of the great concepts in Derrida is pharmacology, the pharmakon. It's a reading of the Phaedrus and also the Protagoras. Very, very important to, again, keep this in mind. Both the remedy and the poison is in one movement, contained within this new toxicology. Very, very important to think this through. And this is the line we're living on, in terms of the remedy and the poison always, and what's going on. So the general intellect in these moments of individuation, very important. So what I'll do, I can go on. I want to also talk about the need for learning territories. And again, I really appreciate this space today, as a learning territory. as Heidegger says, the teacher is really the learner, right, in a sense, or the presenter is really the learner. It's really in the interaction and what's being received that what counts. So the learning territory, that's what we need to set up. We don't need, I mean, to me, we don't need more Harvards, Yales, Princetons, Dartmouths, etc. I know a lot of people that go to those schools. I have a lot of associates. You know, in some ways, you look at the State Department today for the United States, filled with Harvard graduates, you know, etc. Morons, excuse my language, you know, but really in a way, when you really hear them put together stuff, they're scripted. They don't really have any thinking at all, no alacrity of movement. There's no laterality, no real movement at all. You look at the stiff, again, you know, I watch the media very critically. They set up this guy to attack Cy Hirsch. And that's why I mentioned him. You should really, you know, you want an exercise in the best of the US and the worst in one encapsulated moment. Go to Seymour Hirsch, right? See this. He wrote this for Substack because the New Yorker, of which he was a staff member, and the New York Times would not publish it. So it went out on Substack. 1 million hits right away. He was amazed. You know, he's 85. He doesn't know the technology. Wow, I had 1 million hits, you know, he's going on, you know, when he was interviewed about this. Right away, Washington parades out these Harvard-groomed people, right, that come out and scapegoat him right away. Yeah, he doesn't know what he's talking about, et cetera, even though he's got clear evidence all the way down. And this will go before the court. Simultaneously, Kamala Harris is speaking in Munich that she's going to accuse the Russian Federation of war crimes. You know, I'm not saying that they're innocents, please, don't hear me that way, but just look at the juxtapositions and how they're happening temporally in this constant state of emergency, in a way, okay? So going back here again to these learning territories, I'm gonna put up, I kind of elaborated what I thought were seven things to consider here. And I wanna, first of all, let me just map out what I know about ecology. This is not, quote unquote, environmental philosophy is not my specialty, but I wanted to give you the tendencies that I see that came out of Heidegger in the thinking and the things today. So I kind of developed this. So there's a deep ecology, right? Which is, and the phenomenological. These are the first two that grew out of David Abram, if you're interested in this, very good. The Spell of the Sensuous, a great book. Yeah. Right. He's one of the major people. Deep ecology has a very long history in Europe, especially. You know that the Greens took up Heidegger in this way. Michael Zimmerman in the United States. You know, this is basically based on the domination of nature thesis, which again could be another long lecture. The domination of nature thesis, of which Heidegger is very, very, you know, much involved in, as well as some Marxists too. Okay, so then there's the Marxism, and this is John Bellamy Foster. And all of these traditions are basically in one way or another presupposing ecocide as the moment, right? This is not, you know, child's play. So Marxism and ecology, John Bellamy Foster. This is, Paul Burkert and John Bellamy Foster. I'm sorry, I don't know the Canadians involved so much. I see Paul is here. Maybe he can help me out on this. Later, John Bellamy Foster and Paul Burkert, right? Marxism and ecology, which takes up metabolic rifts, and Marx himself spoke about the deprivation of knowledge about the soul, right? The soil, excuse me, about the soil. He has a long elaboration of this in the economic and philosophical manuscripts. Thank you so much. Yeah, and so. This is a very important one, and out of this also comes social ecology, and I recommend a book by Joel Covell, The Enemy of Nature. Joe Colville was a psychoanalyst as well as a very active ecologist, The Enemy of Nature. Very good book. And he became the editor of Capitalism, Nature, and Socialism, right? And then there's, of course, bioregionalism that never really took off, which I think is important. This comes out of the anarchist schools, right? You could talk about Élisée Reclus, the great French geographer, and that anarchic moment on anarchy and geography, and how this played out in terms of bioregional diversity and also the bioregional approach to climate change, buy locally, produce locally, et cetera. What is the biosphere in this, And again, the attack has been on the biosphere. This is what the Anthropocene has done. Right, in a way. So the other one would be, of course, ecofeminism. A field that is not out there as much as it should be. But Vandana Shiva, as well as others, are part of this. Internationally, et cetera, and very important. And then, of course, the primitivism and anarchism of Zerzan on the West Coast, and people. Such as that, right? Who are really off the wall, but have a point about Western civilization. And you can think about, your own First Nations people here, what we call, the Native Americans in the US. Another great thing, I don't know if you know who, I know you know Ward Churchill, because he gave a demonstration of guns up here once. I don't know, pacifism is pathology, Ward Churchill? No, okay, he's quite the character. He's a Native American who has really made a name for himself. He got fired from Colorado because he called the destruction of the World Trade Time, the people that died, 3,000 little Eichmanns. So this is, you don't say things like this so much in the States. But anyway, Churchill is very interesting in the sense that he's been very active with the native population and has been a spokesperson for them. And still in jail is Leonard Peltier, who some people may remember of the AIM movement, the American Indian movement, still in jail, and he's very sick. Mumia, who's innocent, still in jail too. We have many people like this in the States, which is very much hidden from the rest of the world. It's the worst prison system in the world. You talk about Assad, you talk about all these other people in the world, forget it. Just take a trip to Angola and Louisiana, you'll see. I know some people from the 70s still in Angola that were put in for possession of one joint, or robbing a little local grocery store, life terms. And some people that are innocent, there's prison projects that are going on there. So again, I go back to the horror show. But these are the major movements, if you will, of this. And then let me just do this real quickly too, and then and I'll put up the 7 parameters, and maybe we can have a discussion about that. So we have scenes, right? So we have basically the capital scene, right? This is one scene that is being talked about in terms of ecological environmental philosophy, right? What is capital? What is its relationship to domination of nature? How does it ultimately calculate all these things? As you well know, Goldman Sachs in the boardrooms as we speak right here are building programs of new lend-leasing policies, financialization to reconstruct Ukraine, right? And they may even be doing so with their Russian counterparts in some ways. So this is always needs to be kept in mind, how capital is working, how capital and wage labor are always interacting, and how capital dominates the earth. And remember, Marx is, and this is very interesting too, the trinity for Marx was land, labor, and capital. So thinking that triad always within the capital scene, and then all of its specificity seems to me to be very, very, very important as we go forward. So the other scene, of course, is the Anthropocene. And these are people like Sloterdijk. Many, many people in the world are using this kind of terminology. The criticism of this, it still has anthropo in it. It's a geological time scale. It's based on man, right? And domination, right? And it leads, in some cases, at least to my mind, to entropy. This is really where we get stuck, where we get into this aporia where thinking has to go and go beyond. So we have this, the Anthropocene as well. Another, of course, scene would be the Virocene that I put up, but I like also, we need to have something alongside Capitalocene of Empire scene or Empirocene, right? Too. Another scene, as representational, if you will, the Empirocene, how the political economy is working, particularly the politics of empire at this point. To me, it's ridiculous to use imperialism with Russia at this point. It's a term that is really out of Western, political thought. It is a term that was used by Lenin, Bukharin, and many others. Hobson coined the term. And it really meant domination of the imperial scene that goes back to the Roman Empire, and in a sense. You might want to say, yes, it's an aggression, a war of aggression, etc. But again, it shows that words, very importantly, have lost their meaning. We use these words interchangeably without reflection, etc. We don't think. We don't think relationally about the words and why they're being used at a certain time and how these words become almost functionalist cliches. So the Empirocene, and then of course, how do we get out of the Anthropocene, where we are with entropy, where we're stuck. We're stuck in these two moments in a way. So then you go to what Stiegler does, I think, which is very important, negative entropy, right? Thinking beyond that into positive entropy. Right? You begin to think this positively, right? In terms of thermodynamics and other things here. So this becomes, I think, very, very important for us going forward to think about it that way. So, I have a lot here. I mean, maybe what I'll do is let me put up. I keep reminding myself of the 7. I just want to say that if you look at Capital, Volume 1. And these are pointers. Again, I think it's important to revisit these classic texts. I met my friend Aronowitz when he was doing a course on Capital. And in that class, there were the movie actress Zora Lampert, who was a John Cassavetes actress. She was also the face of Goya beans, the little canned goods that they had in the United States. And she always would say, I said, well, why are you here? Et cetera. We got to talking, just auditing. Oh, this is a classic, Marx, et cetera. So really, in a way, one of the classics that we need if we're going to think through, Capital and the scene, that scene that we have here, right? So anyway, to go from there to Volume 1 of Capital, the section on machinery, section 15. Very, very interesting about rapacious capitalism, the raping, if you will, of the earth and how this happens. And there are many, many things we could point to here as well that are very important, but that's a very good starting point in the Capital scene. So in some ways, and alongside of all of this is, what Stiegler will call, and I really like this phrase, and I think this is in Marx with abstract labor, the proletarianization of the world. We have forgotten how to make. We have forgotten how to make. We are disenchanted, et cetera. We live in this kind of moment, and in this not knowing how to make anymore, this proletarianization, we forget how to live. And that seems to me to be this pharmacon that we're always in. We don't really look how things are made. We don't really look at the consequences of these things. And I don't mean to be moralistic about it. I think it's just the way it is, this proletization of the world, et cetera. Okay, so, you know, one thing that, as a strategy, and we can talk about this because I have a lot more, but I don't want to, again, I'm going way over time. Let me put up the 7 things. But one strategy would be, of course, decarbonization, which includes, you know, the why work movement. Why don't we have shorter working hours? This would be important in terms of decarbonization. You know, why don't we start thinking that way, shorter working hours, et cetera, which is a Marxist and a very advanced Marxist position. It's not only about better wages, you know, better benefits. It's about, you know, thinking collectively, what can we really do to get away from this carboniferous capitalism, and how do we decarbonize things? Again, the new opium to me is sustainable development. I stay very far away from this. You know, I know people on Wall Street, they're doing the calculations all the time. You have carbon trading futures, huge new market. It's like the options exchange. You know, natural resources will be traded as derivatives, right? And you'll get credits and you'll make money. It's a new form of financialization. Okay, let me just go through these 7 things and then I'll stop. Yeah. So obviously there's a lot to think about, you know, in that path. So let me just, I wrote up 7 challenges, if you will. I'll see if I can find them. If not, I probably have them in my head. Let me see here. A really good book, by the way, I just was reminded, is Red Cobalt, which is about the mineral cobalt and the tensions it's created in the Congo. People forget that there have been over 10 to 15 million deaths in the Congo. Yeah. So anyway, let me go ahead here. Okay. So 7 challenges, right? From which to engage, right, and think. And I think thinking is acting at this point. We need to think alongside of doing. And it's very important, yeah, thinking and doing. So the first would be, of course, the rise of social networks and digitalization. And this, of course, would be 1993 and to today, right? We're now 30 years since the World Wide Web, right? The second is the growth of the ubiquitous screen, the ubiquitous and what I've talked about this before. This is a Naomi Klein, the Screen New Deal. What's happening in screen economies, the spectacle. Third would be the global financial crisis, which is ongoing. Right? You know, it's just constant crisis. It put people in automation as a social fact. You know, beyond Fordism, the new automation that goes, and all of these are interconnected, right? You know, geopolitical crises, constant. And then 6 and 7 would be the anthropological scene as an existential threat. Or the Anthropocene as existential threat. And then finally, the new, and I think this is the most important one, but the unfolding of new, unfolding of new consequences of industrial populism, if you will, or of populism in general, which ends up in what's called the post-truth age. We're beyond the truth. Post-truth age, or the age of post-truth. What that would mean, I'm sorry about my handwriting. The consequences of of industrial populism. So maybe I'll just leave it at this. I have a lot more to say and can be, hopefully can become a little more specific with you. So I'll close it here and thank you for listening for so long. Like I said, yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you. So I'll open it up to you guys. Again, for me, again, the terms that are very, very important are, of course, ecocide. In its beginning, that we really need to start using that term, in many ways. We really need to use this term. We have to think about what does degrowth really mean? What are the parameters of that? That would be another strategy for thinking, if you will. And also, if you will, to go back to philosophy, since this is a philosophy association, I think, what is it in philosophy? Where do we need to reread? Where do we need to really rethink here? I know some of you want to go be lawyers. I'm sure, that's sort of where the careers and the money are. What I say to people like that in the United States, there are already a million of them, so you'll be 1,000,001. Is that really a calling? Ultimately, that's what I tell philosophy students. So anyway, it's an overproduction and overabundance, although there's always a need because we live in a legalistic universe. Right, which is part of the problem. By the way, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who I'm not the biggest fan of, in his Harvard address in 1979, said something to the effect of, the United States, the problem with it is there's no spirit, there's no Geist, there's no esprit, there's only legalisms. It lives by the law, the legalism, which is kind of interesting how that framework plays out at this point. So anyway, I'll stop there and love to hear from you. And oh, you need a break? Okay. Yeah, and thank you to the people that came.
Thanks to everybody on Zoom and in the space. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back at 1:30. We're going to keep the live stream going. Thank you guys very much.